Let's blow this up.
Look alive, Bomb Squad. We are back for another episode of Let's Blow This Up. I am your host, Jason Sircone. I am multitasking on the fly, trying to put my phone on Do Not Disturb as I share this video on my personal Facebook page. Look at me go. Welcome back to the show. We are in our new time slot of 7 o'clock p.m., and we're shifting to our slightly new format. As I said last week, we haven't really changed things up because a lot of the talk here on Let's Blow This Up has been trending towards podcasting lately, and I've decided to lean into that 100%. We're going to kick this off or keep the trend going, depending on how you want to view it, with a great guest who has an unbelievable slant on how you should be repurposing your content. This is something that I believe in full bore. If you are not leveraging all of this great podcast content that you are creating to its max, you're leaving a lot on the table. And there's a lot of opportunity and really a lot more work you're giving yourself to cover all of those other bases in regards to trying to create content for multiple platforms. So without further ado, I am going to welcome onto the stage to educate the hell out of you tonight, Lyndsay Phillips.
Woohoo! Let's hope I don't trip as I step on the stage.
You did good. You did good. Welcome to Let's Blow This Up, Lyndsay.
Thanks for having me. That intro was slick. That was totally the bomb.
Thank you. Oh, that's two guests in a row that have used that exact same pun.
Yeah.
I love it. It's funny because me and Karen Freeland, we were talking about podcast awards. And that's something that we both learned about when we were in Charlotte, thanks to Dominic Lawson, who I'm hoping to have here as a guest very soon. Mm-hmm. And it's funny, the whole premise of putting your podcast out there for awards, to potentially win awards. I'm wondering if I should just send in this intro, because I've been getting a lot of compliments on how this intro is laid out.
Yeah.
And maybe there's something there. I don't know if that's something they do awards for. I'm going to have to check.
Find out, man. Start your own award for
best intro in the game.
I know. And it totally gets the mojo going, you know?
And hopefully it sets the table and doesn't set the bar too high, because I don't want to be in a position to where we can't live up to the expectations that people have because they got such a good intro.
Yeah.
So it's good to have you here, Lyndsay. I know this is long overdue. I had a lot of fun collaborating with you on your podcast, and we're going to talk about that tonight. And as we've discussed, I know behind the scenes, and I know we talked about on your show, one of the big things that brought us together and first connected us on LinkedIn was the fact that you are very heavy into this content repurposing aspect of podcasting, both for hosts and guests. And that's something that I really want to dig into with you tonight, is how guests can utilize this content as well, because I think that's going to help podcasters, not only in regards to understanding a little bit more why some guests don't share this content, but opening up the lines of communication so they do.
Yeah.
And that's something that I firmly believe in. That is the key component. If you don't communicate with your guest after that interview, and a couple months go by because you're doing other interviews and you're ahead of the game, which is typically where podcasters are at, that guest is doing other things with their time. They're not just on the edge of their seat waiting for your episode to go live, or for their episode to go live. So their excitement is going to diminish to some degree. But if you are focusing on building that relationship and taking things beyond just having them as a guest, there's a lot to be gained there. So we're going to dive into all of this tonight. But before we do, first off, to the Bomb Squad watching us live, thank you for being here. We welcome you to ask questions, drop comments, and be part of this awesome conversation that's about to unfold between Lyndsay and myself. And to you, Lyndsay, I'd like to hand the microphone to you and give you an opportunity to share who you are, what you do, and why podcasting has played such a huge role in your life and in your business.
For sure. And I actually, if I remember correctly, I think the thing that drew me to you was a video that you had on LinkedIn. And I think I started commenting and I was like, damn, like that's a good video. And then I reached out and blah, blah, blah. So it's like the content that you put out, yes, it may obviously attract your avatar and so forth, but it can attract other people within your industry that will raise you up or like connect with you to collaborate or have you on their show or be on a stage, or so it just opens up more opportunities than just clients.
Yeah.
So I wholeheartedly believe that. And that to me, I think what I'm so passionate about is that guests are kind of like tunnel vision, right? I'm going to be a guest on the show, use their platform. I'm going to give my lead magnet and get leads. And then they're like, that's it.
Yeah.
Whereas, it's like if you have that tunnel vision, then you're not going to see all those doors that are going to open. You're not going to be in front of all the opportunities and grow the relationships and boost your authority. I just really want guests to understand that there is more to guesting than borrowing someone's platform and then just hoping to get leads. And they're like tracking the results of their lead magnet like
Yeah.
frantically. And then they're like, I don't know if you get this, and I've seen it before where they're like, oh, but I haven't got many opt-ins to my lead magnets. And I'm like, okay, obviously there's a million variables that factor in, but one of them is like, what kind of shows are you guesting on? And what kind of relationship are you building with that host? Like, is that host a potential client? Is that host clients an audience? Or could you get referrals from them? Could you do summits? Could you do a pod swap? Like, there's so many
Mhm.
different ways. And I've brought that to like some clients' attention, and they're like, oh, snap.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
So many more opportunities if you really stop and like just think of all the different things that you can do.
Absolutely, and that's something that I used to look at all the time because my perspective on guesting started from the other side of the microphone because I was hosting, and then
Mhm.
when I started to get more of this feel for being a guest, I felt like I'm here to serve a specific purpose, and I know what this podcaster is looking to accomplish. Now, everybody's goals are different, but overall, they're looking for someone to collaborate with that can help them create great content that puts asses in the seats. It
Yeah.
gets people invested in their show. Now, the solo podcast, of course, the host is relying on their own voice and their own expertise to make that happen. But when they're welcoming guests onto the show, they should have an understanding of why that guest makes sense for their audience. At the same time, the guest should understand, why does this audience make sense for me? And you can save yourself a lot of time and not go into spray and pray mode to where you're just firing off emails and, hey, I'm the
Mhm.
perfect guest for your show to 100 podcasts in a day and hoping to respond. If you get a little bit more intentional about what show you're reaching out to, because it does absolutely make
Yeah.
sense. And I'll reference what you said, Lyndsay. You saw a video that I posted. That's a great way to find a podcast to make a guest appearance on. If you're looking to amplify your message, get on shows that align with your mission and your message, and you find somebody's video on Instagram or TikTok or YouTube or LinkedIn, whatever social platform you happen to be playing on, and you reach out to them and say, Lyndsay, I just had a stop the scroll moment with this video you posted. It was amazing. And I love that you were referencing XYZ. This is something I talk about often. Are you looking for more guests? I'd love to join you if you are. That's your pitch. It doesn't have to
100%.
be this obituary of everything that you've accomplished in your life.
Right? It's
Make it
more authentic.
authentic, and it starts a conversation,
Yeah.
and that's where the magic lies. If you can start conversing with that person
Yeah.
and start building a relationship right out of the gates, not just sell, you're going to put yourself in a much better spot.
Absolutely. And it's like, I think too like I love LinkedIn the most, and that's where we connected.
Hmm.
And it's almost like people want to just post and then
There it
just sit
goes.
back and wait for leads, but I'm not getting engagement. It's like you get back what you put in. Like I
Yep.
even notice if I was like sick for a week or family emergency or whatever, and I haven't spent a lot of time on Facebook or LinkedIn, I don't get it back. When I'm like on there commenting on things, I'm like checking for new guests for the
Hmm.
show, or I'm following someone that's following someone else, and then connect with them. It all just grows and builds upon itself, and I notice the stats will match that, and there's more quote unquote action.
That's where social media is now. It's not. I mean, I would argue that even back in the day, if you didn't spend time engaging, you weren't getting the results that you
Mhm.
wanted. You might get a little bit more in regards to visibility because the algorithms were set a little differently just a few years back. But if you're not willing to put in the time to actually engage and put in comments on posts that you can
Yeah.
actually add relevant
Yeah.
contributions to, not just great post or
I
here's an
know.
emoji. Like,
Say
come
something
on.
intelligent.
Yeah, like interject something that would stand out. And I think you can get more from that than just constantly posting your own content and waiting for the
Mhm.
floodgates to open because these platforms are not wired that way anymore.
Yeah, no, and I've commented on people's posts, and I've noticed that the other people commented are following me, and then some have reached out. So it's
Mhm.
like it expands your circles so much
Yeah.
quicker. I know you sort of asked me about what I do, and I kind of got sidetracked because I was so passionate about what I want
We're
to
going to
share.
get back to that. Yeah.
But, but to me, it's like, yes, I'm in the repurposing game, leveraging content. And yes, you need consistent content to stay visible, to stay relevant and current, and have something for someone to comment on.
Mhm.
And that it does capture someone's attention, whether it's a podcast host, whether it's someone that is within your industry, a client, a prospect, whatever. But it's it's a piece of the puzzle, and
Yeah.
I totally try to coach my clients on this as well. It's like you know, I have clients that guest on a podcast. We create the blog post so that they have content on their website, directing traffic. And then when someone goes to their site, they're like, oh, they guest on all of these shows. Obviously, they're an expert. It showcases their authority in a really quick and easy way. You do not want people to be digging around and trying to search on your website, make it visible. And
Mhm.
then sharing those reels, shorts, quotes from the podcast that you've guested on, like showcase where it came from that you guested on XYZ show or whatever. And then people, even if they're just skimming and they're not actually reading that quote carousel, but they see, oh, she was on that summit, or oh, she was on that podcast and that's where that originated, you automatically have a different perception of that entrepreneur. You know they
Yes.
are sought after and they are an expert. So again, I even think that engagement, yes, you want engagement,
Mhm.
but it's not even always the be all and end all. I've had people reach out saying, I've been following your stuff. I love your podcast, this, that, and the other. And like, I've been following what you do for like forever. I've just never commented on your stuff. And then they reached out. So
Yeah.
you never know who's watching,
Right.
whether they like, click, or do whatever. Yes, you still want that,
Yeah.
but you still need to be relevant and visible.
And it psychologically plants seeds, which
Yeah.
I think, like you said, you don't know when someone's going to finally respond.
Mm-mm.
This is why they say consistency with email marketing is so important because if
Mhm.
you are consistently bringing value to that community that you're building through your email list, you could have people on that list that will consume that content, not respond to anything, but then maybe 2 years later, now the time
Mhm.
is right for them to make a buying decision. And
Yeah.
because you've been there impacting them, they may not have responded then, but all of a sudden, hey, I'm ready to sign the dotted line.
Yeah.
And people see things like that, or they see an interview clip here, a blurb or a quote there, all of this stuff coming from all of these different outlets. It tells that person that's seeing you, this person's in demand. Clearly, they know what they're talking about because they're on all these other podcasts, they're on all these live streams, they're getting the notoriety from the rest of the world. If I want to solve this problem that they can help me solve, I've got my social proof. I'm going
Yeah.
to them. I'm going to have them take me from point A to point B.
Agreed. And to piggyback off of that, I kind of get this, I call it a myth, but like guests say, oh, I've got like maybe 2 talks that they say on different podcasts. And so the content is the same, like over and over. So I'm not going to put it on my website. I don't want to share it because I already shared it like a month ago because I was on some podcast. It was the same topic.
Hmm.
But it's like when you stop and think about it, you're in like my business, it's all about leveraging and repurposing content, whether you're a podcast host or a podcast guest. I'm not talking, I know enough about email marketing and I'll say tips here and there, because it's kind of tied to podcasting, but I don't make that I don't lead with that content because it's not what I do.
Right.
So naturally, my content is going to be repetitive, same thing, different angle, that kind of thing. And like you said, someone could be, you know, opening up your email for a year and just it didn't click, it wasn't the right time, the message just didn't hit home, whatever. So
Hmm.
you need to repeat those nuggets of your expertise, those tips, your solution, like over and over and over. And the beauty thing about being on podcasts is that the reel is going to look different. The quote is going to look different. They're not going to remember that the basis of the content is the same because the way you say it one time is going to be slightly different than how you say it another time. So
Yeah.
one way may resonate with one person, and some people may resonate with the video and be like, oh, dang, yeah, that's a good tip. Or they may see a carousel and scroll through. They may ignore a quote. Everyone's a little bit different on how they, digest information. And so it's like, don't be afraid to repurpose literally every podcast that you guest on
Yeah.
to create that consistent content that's going to boost your authority. So that's a huge myth that I want to let guests know. Like, no, you need to repeat, actually.
Now, there's value in repetition because it takes sometimes many, many times for a person to see a message, whether it sounds exactly the same or there's some slight
Mhm.
variations. If they don't have that message in front of them repeatedly, think of the amount of content that we are all inundated with on a daily basis. It's insanity. So, a little repetition
Yeah,
to showcase how important something is, don't be afraid of that, which
no.
leads me into the question. I'm going to go back to what I kicked off with, but I'll ask it a little bit differently. What brought you into this space, Lyndsay? What made you realize that this was something that needed to be emphasized much more in the podcasting space and in the business space overall?
There's been a few like steps in the journey, so to speak. So I've been in the content marketing space for what feels like forever.
Hmm.
And then I niched down to podcasting and I did launches and production and the promotion. I didn't really play with guests, mainly the hosts.
Hmm.
And I just found that it wasn't like from a logistical standpoint, it was harder for me to scale my own business dealing with launches and stuff like that. And then obviously with the pandemic, it just felt like there were editors, production companies, like, coming out of every woodwork everywhere, and then there were companies that were, like, all about how to grow your podcast, and I just felt like it was easy for me to get lost in the sea. I didn't know how to differentiate myself enough, and I also found that within the industry, it was very focused on hosts, monetizing, advertising, growing your audience, launching. And I was sort of like, what about guests? Like, they're still in podcasting. It's just the other side of the mic.
Hmm.
They still need to be strategic. You don't just show up
Yes.
and just expect the best.
Thank you.
And I feel like there's not enough podcasts out there that talk about the guests. There's not even that many companies besides podcast guest bookers. I'm like, there's not a lot of information out there. So I'm like, it kind of got to be in my bonnet, to be quite honest. And I'm just like, and I love repurposing content, being in the content marketing space. And I'm like, how can I help guests really make a bigger impact and not kill themselves trying to make content like week after week? Meanwhile, they've got all this stuff in their back pocket that
Yeah.
they can use. And then I would see them kind of like post here and there, and then like that's it. I'm like, oh my God, there's so much more you can do. And it drove me crazy. So
Right.
yeah, so that's like I still work with hosts and what have you, and I still do a little bit of production just for some close-knit clients of mine. But I just love focusing on the guest and helping them become the expert and making the impact that they really want and to grow their business using podcast guesting because it can be done. It is being done.
There's so much power in the guest, and that's something when I first leaned into this, I looked at that whole element much like you. If there's no strategy, why are you even bothering?
I
Because in
know.
so many cases, you're just wasting your time. If you're just going on any show that'll have you as a guest, if you're not, if it's not intentional in regards to who you're connecting with, who you're actually
Yeah,
collaborating with, so you can take those next steps towards a relationship, it's really just spinning your wheels. Will you get some practice on the microphone? Sure. But at the end of the day, if that practice is pointed towards an audience that really doesn't give a damn, then why are you even you're
I know.
expanding that energy to make that happen? There has to be a certain level of respect for what this platform can give back. And I think that respect goes both ways because guests obviously have to respect what the host is trying to build in
Mhm.
regards to a podcast that engages, entertains, educates, and brings people in, as I said, puts the asses in the seats and keeps them there so that they can grow and open up new opportunities. But on the flip side, the host has to respect what the guest is after as well. Because if the host just expects that guest to show up and be a valuable resource, but then does nothing for them after that,
I
well,
know.
that's selfish on the host side. And unfortunately, we see
100%.
that sometimes
You
where
do.
there's that, it might not be like a big confrontation type of clash,
Yeah.
but there's such a lack of communication between both sides that the host doesn't set clear expectations, so the guest goes
Mhm.
into sales mode, but the guest
Yeah.
also shows up with this sales mentality, even though the host is trying to steer the ship in a certain way to where value is being provided. But no, we're turning this into an infomercial. It can really go off the rails fast.
It
And
can, and it
yeah.
has.
And I've been a part of it. I'm sure you have too, having
Yeah.
played both sides of this. There are times when you just shake your head and you wonder how in the hell is this even going to work for both sides at all? Because I feel like there's just so many things out of place.
I know, and that people almost think like, "Oh, I'm gonna guest on a podcast, I'm gonna host a podcast, and then, the universe is just gonna open up and all these leads and stuff and opportunities are gonna come my way." It's like, that's
Mhm.
not the case.
Not at
And
all.
it's um, like I've guested on a ton of podcasts, obviously, and this is part of the reason why I created my podcast leverage system. I
Mhm.
have it for hosts and guests because I would guest on shows and sometimes, like, it's live, woohoo, I get an image and I'm like, "Oh my god, that image is so ugly." Or not to be rude, but, like, and then I'm like, "Damn." And so I created my own images where it was like the
Yeah.
podcast art to say, "Yeah, I was featured on this." I'm like, "Oh, then it's my branding." And then,
Yeah.
or sometimes, like, the show notes were, like, just my bio and the title, they, like, played on my business name. It was like, I don't know, smooth
Right.
sailing for content marketing or something.
Right.
And I'm like, that
Right.
doesn't tell anybody what they're gonna learn from that
Yeah.
podcast episode. And the show notes were like, wah, wah. Like it just
Mhm.
no one had any clue what the episode was even about. So I'm like, how are people even gonna listen to that? And
Yeah.
then another show I was on, not to I've been on great shows too, just so you know.
Oh,
Another
yeah, but
show,
again, all
I
the
mean,
disasters.
sometimes you don't know what they're gonna give you afterwards, right?
Yeah.
The clip that they had with the show that I was on, the clip that they pulled was like a joke that we had between each other. And I was kinda like, "That's weird." I'm like, "Well, I'm not sharing that." Like, because it
Yeah, what
didn't
does that
showcase
do?
my authority. It didn't
Right.
showcase any tip that served anybody. And I was like, "Dang." And I'm like, I had the raw video, so I'm like, I'm gonna make my own clips of things that I said that were actually poignant and, like, help someone.
Mhm.
And so I started making my own content from it because I'm like, I wanna be in control over how I'm being positioned and what content is being shared. I
Yep.
wanna be in control. I would make my own show notes. Sometimes I would even give it to them. "Hey, if you wanna use it, I made my own show notes," and I
Mhm.
would publish it on my website with my own show notes. Um, and yeah, so I just kind of, like, take that control back. You can control the narrative. You can control how you're being positioned out into the world. Do
Yeah.
not sit back and rely on the host. Some hosts, fantastic, gave me reels up the yin yang and they were fantastic, but some are not. And
Yeah.
so why just do it yourself or hire me,
Well,
whichever.
there you go. And I think when you're looking for shows, this comes down to the selection process again.
True.
As I said, when you're doing your outreach, that's one of the things I look at.
Yeah, I didn't back then.
There's a number of criteria that I look at that I recommend to anybody. We can talk about those here in a moment, but a big one is, how do they promote their content?
Yeah.
Is there a lot of content out there? If there's no promotion, you can pretty much assume that's going to be how it is for you as well.
Mhm.
So if they're not putting anything out there in any regard, then okay. Why? I mean, maybe there's, it doesn't have to be a deal breaker,
Yeah.
but you also have to be expecting pretty much nothing in return in regards to assets to use to market the show.
No.
So that's something you have to look at. And I feel that, again, we get into this position as hosts where we're doing so much to try to get ahead that maybe we're not putting enough emphasis on that. And that's where sometimes outsourcing can play a major role and it can help. Or if you don't want to outsource, there are a number of AI tools that you can lean into these days that will give you something to work with.
Yeah.
If that way, it's not just
Something is
falling
better than
completely dead.
nothing.
And I think of someone like you, Lyndsay, you are eager to want to share. Many guests aren't wired that way. And I think they should all be talking to you about why this is so important. Because if
Yeah.
I'm spending my time with somebody and collaborating, for me, like anytime I'm doing a collaboration, I look at the networking opportunity that's in play. What can we do to start building a relationship? Can we set up another call to where we're talking about strategies and ways we can work together that doesn't involve us recording a podcast? To me, that's part of the process, and there should be content that comes after the fact, but that's my main driver. But if you've got a guest
Same.
that is incredibly engaged with the whole process and wants to share, you should be wrapping your arms around them, giving them a big hug, thanking them for being in that mode, and then give them what they want. Let them exploit the hell out of your show. So there
100%.
is something out there that could potentially open up a whole new audience for you and your podcast.
Absolutely. And some hosts are like, "Oh, the guests asked me for the raw video. I don't think I should give it to them."
Yeah.
Because then I'm like, "Well, what? They put it on their YouTube and more people will know about your podcast?" Like, I don't get that.
I don't
And what
either.
are they going to do?
This was actually it wasn't even really a debate. It happened on a clubhouse room I was in where I brought that up. I like that. I like to ask for that.
Yeah, I do.
Oftentimes, I mean, someone usually they'll say yes, but then it doesn't happen, or unless you stay on them and say, hey, but somebody brought up the fact that giving you that video could potentially give you this piece of content that you then create assets for that are more in your brand aesthetics versus the podcast aesthetics.
Right.
I do understand that.
Yeah.
But if you're growing your show and you want to get more eyes on that subject, perhaps set some ground rules.
Yeah.
And find out what they want to do with that content. But ultimately look at that as something that can boost what you're doing right now and potentially put some new eyes on what you're doing. That's what it's all about. And to pass up opportunities like that, I think, is a huge miss.
I think so too. And it's not like they're going to make you look like an idiot. They're going to take out a piece where they're talking or their quote.
Right.
So it's like, it came out of their mouth anyways in the podcast. I'm like, what does it matter?
Right. Well, let's go back to that communication piece, because I think that's key. And that's something that I know I've thrown podcasters for a loop when I bring this up, because as well as me, when a new episode goes live, when we're releasing that episode, it's literally the most important piece of content to ever be unveiled to planet Earth. That's the mentality. Everybody needs to hear this. Everybody needs to watch this. Everybody needs to love this. And the expectation that we have is that the guest that joined us is going to be just as excited to jump on that content and share it with the world as we are, and be just as jazzed up as they were the day they joined us to record it.
Yeah.
But as I said, that is not what happens, because
I
we have lives
know.
outside of our podcast, and we have lives outside of the podcast we're making guest appearances on.
Yeah.
So a lot's happened from when that podcast went live or was recorded to when it went live. And in some cases, it could be a couple weeks. Some cases, it could be a couple weeks. Or a couple months.
Yes.
I've had guest appearances that have gone 6, 7, 8, 9 months.
That's a long time.
That's way too long. I think a good window at a max is 3 months.
Yeah, I wouldn't want longer.
No, because I've run into a couple, like, well, I don't even have that offer in place anymore, because you told me when you were going to release this, it was only going to be a few weeks, and now we're 9 months out.
I've pivoted my business.
Yeah, I've done a number of different things differently now. Like, this is no longer relevant for me, so I can't really share this, because if somebody grabs hold of the message and reaches out to me, like, yeah, I was doing that last year. But what I ask podcasters when they get mad, because many guests will say, this is great, I can't wait, tell me when it's live, give me assets to share, but then there's radio silence. And there's nothing that takes place between when that first exchange happened and when the episode went live. And I always ask, what kind of communication have you had with that guest since they recorded with you? Now, there might have been a few social media interactions here or there, but many of them say, oh, well, yeah, I really haven't talked to them since we recorded.
Yeah.
And that's where I say, okay, and there's your issue, because if you want them to be just as excited as they were the day they recorded, you should be building a relationship with them. Now, I'm not saying you drop everything to be their best friend, and they're not going to do that either.
Just little touch points.
Yeah, absolutely. Hey, this is when I have the podcast scheduled to go out. My big thing is always, what can we do to take this to the next level? Would you like to have a call where we can talk and plot world domination without having to record a podcast first? That's why I think this is the most powerful networking tool from a digital perspective that we have, because every time you collaborate with somebody, you have that opportunity. But if you don't seize that opportunity, it's left on the table, and who knows what you may have missed out on. That's where I feel that hosts need to get better. Guests can do this too. Yeah. If a guest, because I've done that from the guest side, reached out to a host and said, I loved recording with you. Would you be open to having a call to talk about some other things? I'd love to continue the conversation. Not everybody says yes, and that's okay. No. You can't expect 100% on that, but taking those steps to make this more active communication, I think, is going to lead to more guests staying engaged in the whole process, and then ultimately sharing that content in a much larger capacity once it goes live. What are your thoughts on that, Lyndsay?
Yeah, I mean, that to me is the fun part, to be all honest. Like, how many times have we talked? It's like, love the conversations that we have. We're very like-minded. And there's like other people that are podcast guest bookers, and like, we've had conversations. I've been on their show. I have forwarded people to them, or like they've had a podcast. So I'm like, oh, this person would actually be a really great guest. So I've introduced them. Likewise for them, they've reached out to me and be like, oh, I thought about this person. I think they'd be a great guest for your show. Or, hey, they were looking at repurposing stuff and don't know if it's going to work, like whatever, but I wanted to introduce you to them so you can have a conversation. And it's like, that's how like the ball's going to keep going. Yeah. And you're going to increase followers. You're going to connect to more people. More opportunities are going to come your way. Referrals, like, again, other connections. It can get a little crazy though. I'm not going to lie. Like, I feel like sometimes my calendar is like, holy mother of God, there are a little bit, maybe too many connection calls that I'm going to have to like rein it in and be a little bit more picky on what I say yes to, because it can really squash your bandwidth for whatever else you're doing. So it is hard to like say yes to everything. But the bottom line is having that communication, commenting on their posts, DMing them, checking in, or I'll see that someone's got like a new episode that went live, or they've got a new book or whatever it is. 100% I'll share it. And they're like, oh my God, you shared it? I'm like, yeah, it's great content. And how easy is it to share someone else's content rather than making your own? But I'm like, I want to help them out. And so if you like do those little tiny things, even if in your head, you're like, okay, I need to do 5 touch points this week. find a past guest, find someone that you were on, or just whoever's in your circle, whatever it may be. But if you do like 5 touch points in some way or form, it will come back to you and you will be staggered at the results and opportunities that'll start coming your way and doors that'll open.
Yep. One a week. Think about that. If you do one of those a week,
Right?
52 potential opportunities that you open
Yeah.
up for yourself throughout the year. It's better than nothing. And it's better than just leaving that opportunity on the table
Yeah.
because, again, you never know. You never know unless you ask. And again, many people are locked in content creation mode, which
Yeah.
I get. Obviously, that's a big component of what we're doing here. But to not continue that conversation, you're cutting the human element out of the whole equation.
Yeah.
And that sucks. That's not what you want. You want
I
this
think
to
that's where the
serve.
biggest payoff is, to be quite
Me too.
honest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because the content's always going to be there. Once you
Mhm.
post it, once you publish it, it's always going to be there for people to consume. But in the moment, this is where, again, we're live, so we'll have viewers that drop in and out, but there are folks also listening to this on the podcast element of Let's Blow This Up that are experiencing this for the first time. But here in the moment, it's you and I
Yeah.
continuing to build upon the relationship we started by sharing more ideas, connecting on these things that we're incredibly passionate about. Why would you not want to take that to the next level? It's like going on the greatest first date ever and then never talking to that person again.
Yeah.
Because if both sides agree that it was a great time, why would you
I
not want to
know.
see what comes next?
Absolutely. And it's like it's even cool, and there's like someone I had on my show, and she's like the procrastination coach. Her name is escaping me right now. I'm so sorry. But she is like the sweetest woman. And we've connected and I forward things to her. And she's even like, we've had conversations. She's like, how can I help you? Like, are you having a problem with this? And so she like coached me for half an hour.
Yeah.
And I'm like, and she sent something to me. She's like, can I get feedback on this? I'm like, absolutely. Even those little things where you feel like you're being supported by other entrepreneurs and their expertise can kind of give a unique view on your own issue or problem. Like we live in this like little bubble sometimes, but it's like I could totally message you and lean on you and be like, "Hey, I'm thinking about doing this. Like, could we talk for 15 minutes like to get your input?"
Right.
100%. And I would do
Yeah.
the same for you. So it's
Absolutely.
like just like feel like we don't have to be so alone in our own little bubble. And those
Yeah.
podcast relationships can form into friendships or like yeah, just getting other people's views of being in the podcast industry or whatever.
The strength of community. That's why
Yeah,
you're building a community. You want people that you can lean on. Not that you're going to be taking advantage of that and leaning on them all the time,
no.
24/7, but it's nice to have people that you can connect with, have
Yeah.
conversations with, potentially see a new perspective that may have been overlooked.
Mhm.
If you're ignoring that, whew, that's one of those
I know.
intangible elements of podcasting for hosts and guests. Again, focused on download metrics, focused on lead magnet subscriptions, whatever. Those are the key drivers in many cases. But these intangibles that happen along the way,
I know.
I think that's where the power lies. And you're going to get those other things the better you get at everything else. The fundamentals come first: building relationships, having human connection, being a source of value from both sides, trying to collaborate on something that is going to impact the audience in a profound way.
Yeah.
All of the other things fall into place if you're focused on those fundamentals first.
Absolutely. And you can use your content to further that, right? Like
Hmm.
if like when someone else shares an episode that I've been on a year ago and they share it again, I'm like, "Oh, yay." Like you feel good about that, right? Like obviously I made an impact. They remembered me, whatever. They tagged me. Then they're in my brain and I'm going to like in turn do something for them, obviously share it or whatever. But it's like when I'm sharing content, it's like I want to think about, okay, how can I create a conversation with what's going on? Because you don't want like it's great to have likes, but you do want to try to invoke a conversation or discussion or whatever.
Hmm.
And like tagging people and having their people comment and so forth. It's like you want to use that content to connect with not just the guest or the host and tagging them, but like your audience, like ask them their opinion. Like,
Right.
hey, like we've had this debate and blah blah blah, blah, and like what say you? You know, like or and give your perspective. I'm
Yeah.
gonna say one more thing on my little soapbox here.
Go
And
for it.
that is, I find that hosts, when they're sharing the material, it's good to like, yes, they gave this point, that point. Um, here's a tip that they shared, whatever it may be. But don't be afraid to bring your own personality into that and your own viewpoint and your own perspective. Even if it's not the same as the guest, it'd be like, hey, we had a hot discussion about XYZ. Here's their take. I like it,
Mhm.
but I'm gonna play devil's advocate and say, "What about this?" And then that's how you get that conversation going so that your social content is not super dry and you're bringing yourself into it and giving your own perspective. And a lot of people don't think about that. Like, "Oh, but it's their content. It's their." Yeah, but it's your channel. Like you can give your perspective, and show that you're an intelligent human being that thinks about things,
Right.
but, like, it gets those thoughts going and those conversations beyond the podcast.
And that's the idea too, because as I said, in the moment, it's you and I. When this content's live, this is what you want the conversation to be centered around. What does the
Mhm.
audience think of this? How are
Yeah,
they relating to that conversation? Adding your own additional thoughts and perspectives on that content that's being shared should stimulate more conversation. That's
yeah,
what you're hoping for. If you're not leaning into that, that's just another missed opportunity, because this
yeah,
is
yeah,
that's the social element of social media
yeah,
that we should be hoping comes to life. And in some cases, especially in the beginning, sometimes that doesn't get the traction because of algorithms and needing to be consistent and more eyes on things, so on and
yeah,
so forth. But yes, I agree 100%. If you're not starting good conversations through this content, what are you doing with it?
I
Like, what's
know.
what's the point?
And it's hard. I mean, some people it doesn't come naturally, right? Like, some people
Mhm.
are not writers. Like,
True story.
you know what I mean? Like, some people are good at it, some people are not.
No,
And
for
so
sure.
or, like, creating videos or editing, like, all the things.
Yeah.
And so when they go to share content, they either don't feel confident in sharing their own opinion and perspective about the thing, or
Mhm.
they just get stuck on what to write, or they're stuck for time,
Yeah.
which is kind of a bit of a challenge.
And it's sort of contradictory to why you'd want to be a podcast guest if you're not going to have a strong opinion or
Mm,
the ability to potentially craft a good message.
yeah.
Podcast guesting would be a little difficult too. But that said, it's important to understand everybody has to start at point A.
Yeah.
And the more you do these things, the more comfortable you get.
Yeah.
It may feel incredibly uncomfortable to go on a podcast for the very first time, just as much as it may feel uncomfortable to put a very strong opinion onto
Yeah.
social media. But as you start to become more comfortable and you truly believe in what you're talking about, it's going to start resonating with the right people. And as that happens, you start to develop your core tribe, and now you're talking
Yeah.
with them and having these conversations. But if you hold back and don't open up that door, again, it seems to be the theme of the show, missed opportunities. You
Yeah.
don't want to go down that path.
No. And it can be hard to be vulnerable. Like, I know I suck at it when it comes to like social media and stuff like that. And I see other people and they're vulnerable in their posts. And I'm like,
Yeah.
you gravitate towards those people. So it's like, why can't I?
No, I get it. I
You are
that's
what you are.
sometimes it's, you said it perfectly. Sometimes it's hard to go down that path.
Yeah,
It really is. I struggle with that too. Sometimes I just,
I know.
part of me feels like this isn't the message that I'm trying to put into the world. So I try to hold back. And
Yeah.
is
Or don't
there,
admit when things suck or like, you know what I
yeah,
mean?
yeah.
I would rather someone be honest and share their perspective. And
Mhm,
so, yeah, I try really hard. Honestly, I do. I think about it a lot. But I guess the point that I'm getting across is just think about how you're wording your social media when you are sharing a podcast, that
mhm,
don't be afraid to be yourself and weave your authenticity, your opinions, your perspective
yeah,
into it versus it just being cold hard facts.
agreed. Well, as we get towards the final 15 minutes of our conversation tonight, which I said this hour has flown
I
by,
know.
let's lean into the repurposing aspect and full bore, what should we be focused on? And let's start with guests, because I know that's your specialty. That's what you're constantly helping people with. What are the non-negotiables that guests should be focused on when they are repurposing and sharing content from their guest appearances?
I would say at least once a month, take one of them and create a blog post. So I usually do like an intro, bullets of what you'll learn. I do the timestamps of like key spots, and then like a blog post. And then you can break it up with call to actions and quotes and stuff like that. Obviously get the raw video, put that up in YouTube. Then you can use that intro, the bullets, the timestamps, because timestamps too, when you put the word 00, like you put zeros on it and then the word intro, it activates the chapters, which is really helpful. So then you're now on your site looking like an expert. You're on YouTube. And then the other thing that non-negotiable would be is to create videos, because that is what is stopping the scroll and capturing attention.
Yeah.
And people like, I could go on about Instagram. I love it. But the point is that Reels, Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube Shorts, that it puts you in front of a new audience. Some of it is vanity metrics. Like you also have to look at, okay, yay, I've got so many views. How many people are watching all of it, right? Or when are they dropping out and stuff like that? So you do have to look at that. But the point is, it's giving you that opportunity to get someone's attention that you don't already know and they don't know you, without spending money on ads. So to me, I'm like, that's a huge benefit. And I've had clients where like their reels or their YouTube shorts are capturing a ton of attention. And with that, it like activates the algorithm. So their video views are going up, their subscribers are going up. And so it all like snowballs, right? You just have to like start getting that traction. Yeah, those are totally my non-negotiables.
Now, if a host does not want to relinquish the raw video, I mean, again, my perspective,
I have
why
a hack
wouldn't you?
that.
Right, but how do you advise a client to proceed if they won't give you that content up?
There's a couple of ways. One is obviously asking the raw video, but let them know what you're going to do. Like, hey, I would love to slice and dice and make some reels and videos so I can share this episode in a bigger way. They're very unlikely going to say no.
I would think so.
But there's also, again, different software for video editing that makes clips and stuff like that, where you can actually put the YouTube link in there. And so you can take their YouTube link and use it and make little reels and clips and get show notes and all that good stuff. So there is that, but you can always get the audio and make like audiograms. They don't get as much traction because you don't see the people's faces.
Yeah.
But it's something, it has movement. It's going to stop the scroll and it's going to work with the algorithm because it's technically a video. But yeah, obviously real face-to-face videos are the best.
I like to think that if, as the guest, you're looking at beyond just being part of the show as the guest in that moment and taking that next step. I look at, again, this goes back to that communication element that I was talking about before. But for me as a guest, the second I am done being a guest on somebody's show, we have our little green room conversation after the show's over. Hopefully that may lead to something new. I'm always asking questions about what do we do next? Can we set up another call? Maybe we're just going back on what we talked about, whatever. And if it doesn't come up, I will bring it up in an email later. But the first thing I do the second I get off that call or get off that recording, I go right to Apple Podcasts and I leave them a review. That to me, I think stands out.
100%.
So you're taking these steps to where it's not always just an ask.
Yeah.
Something else I like to do is find their most recent episode that they've shared, reshare it and just say, I was just a guest on this podcast as well. I had a great time. I'm really looking forward to you guys checking this out when it goes live. But for now, you should be listening or watching this podcast as well.
Yeah.
That takes 2
I
minutes to do
know, in the
both
grand
those
scheme of
things, right?
things, right?
Can open up those doors to where the host would say, "Oh my god, they really
Right?
care.
They
They
made an
are really
effort?
invested." And again, it's content that you didn't have to create.
Yeah.
I wouldn't say I have a standard review. I try to give a review that makes a I'm thinking about myself. I really am. I'm thinking about them. But my thought is the more good reviews this podcaster has, if somebody relies on these reviews to make a decision on whether they want to listen or not, if they
Yeah.
see a review that says exactly what my experience was and what they're going to hear when they tune in, if they're listening to the show now, then they're going to hear me when I'm on there.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking about my own guest appearance because I want my message to be heard, but I'm also helping them grow at the same time.
Yeah.
I think
Good
little
word.
elements like that would make a host say, "Yeah, they want my raw content. Clearly, they're invested in what we're doing
Yeah.
here. I want to hand it over to them. I want to see what they do next."
Yeah. Yeah,
That's what's
absolutely.
happening.
And I think too, if you and I know you're all about processes too, it's like if you build that into your process or have a team that can take some of those things off your plate,
Mhm.
then you're like, just like after my podcast, I like record the intro, I like upload the stuff. Like I do like 15 minutes worth of stuff. So
Yeah.
it's like just building that in. Okay, I'm guesting on a podcast. I'm going to do 15 minutes worth of stuff when I get off the call. And
Yeah.
it's like you just build that into your process and it just feels like a no-brainer.
Absolutely. It comes down to the relationship side of things. I think more opportunities to get that content in your
Yeah.
hands come from actually showing them that you are
Yeah.
invested. It's a thank you for having me on the
Yeah.
show, but everybody wins in that
I
respect.
know.
Everybody's getting something to work with. If you create content that the host can then reshare, that's less that they have to do. Now, they should still
Yeah.
be doing their part to
Yeah.
create the assets that they do or their team does. But at the same time, the more information that's out there, the better it is for everybody because you're opening up the eyes and ears of so many potential listeners and viewers.
Yeah, and it
Right.
gives you another opportunity. Like when I make more reels for shows that I've guested on, I'm obviously going to tag, maybe not in every post, but I'm going to tag the host in it. And it just gives me
Mhm.
that other opportunity to be in front of their audience.
Yep.
And yeah, they're like, you made this? Like they're like so happy. It's like, well, yeah, it's a win-win.
Yeah, no, 100%. And then from a host side of things, I know this is something I talk about big time through Bombtrack Media with anybody I'm talking about in passing. We leave a lot of content on the table because many podcasters, the ones that are proactive, they're working ahead, they're building out content months in advance so they have stuff queued in case life happens or they need to take a
Mhm.
break or they just want to take a break. They're not missing a beat because they're ahead of the game. But in doing that, a lot of times that content doesn't see the light of day until it's time for the audio component to go live. And that's when everything starts getting pulled: video clips, transcripts for social posts, emails, blogs, show notes. And if it's only being used in that 1 week period,
It's
you can
true.
only share so much. But think about how TV shows and even movies put trailers and commercials out
Yeah.
weeks and months in advance to pump up the crowd and get them excited. So there's anticipation building to when this will go live. Now, it takes a little bit of legwork to get ahead, but
Yeah.
in addition to sharing what's live this week, you can also say coming up next week, coming up
Yeah.
in 2 weeks, coming up in 3 weeks, because you have that content. You don't have to completely rip out every social media role or reel that you're going to use right on the spot, like the second you get done recording. But it doesn't hurt to pull one, and you can,
Yeah. And
and
have
you
a
can,
little teaser, like
yeah. Like
for sure.
yesterday, I recorded with Lyndsay. The episode's going to be live in a few weeks, but I wanted to give you a preview of our great conversation. Try to find
Yeah.
that one key clip
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
someone might say, "Whoa, okay, I want to tune in for that. I better go subscribe now so I know when it goes live." Like things
Mm.
like
Yeah.
that
Yeah. True.
can trigger just that psychological side of planning it in your head, saying, "Okay, I want to be a part of this experience." If it's not just for that clip, maybe there's other things that I'm missing from this podcast. I need to go listen to what's happening. So to me, that's what repurposing is about to me. If I had to put a big net
Mm.
over all of this, it's all about building that anticipation, but also it's all about getting the most potential content from your production that you
Yeah.
possibly can. So at the end of the day, you end up working smarter, not harder.
Yeah, 100%. And using it not just for the sake of content, but using it to like get clients, get more calls, like
Yeah.
get in front of other people's audiences. Um, get in front of people that aren't already following you, like Reels and YouTube Shorts, to showcase yourself as an authority on your
Hmm.
website. To like, to create those relationships and have those other touch points with those guests and hosts. It's like, yeah, you can just that's my whole thing is like leverage the hell out of it in
Hmm.
so many different ways
And I
to
know
make
I
a
was
difference.
telling you before we got started tonight, Lindsay, today, as we sit and record, I had a small presentation for a networking group that I did this morning. And I was sharing about the value of podcasting for business and what can this do to truly impact what you're doing from a marketing perspective, from a branding perspective. And I know when I was a guest on your show, we talked about that. And
Mhm.
a lot of our conversation was in reference to the launch of a podcast and my methods and strategy for how you do this the right way so you're not pod fading after just a few
Mhm.
episodes. But I knew that having listened to that and shared clips that you made and done all these things and connecting myself with that podcast when it went live and even before it went live, I knew there were elements of that collaboration that we did that I wanted to work into my presentation. So on my way to that presentation, I listened to our episode again and refreshed my memory on some of those points. And I was able to work them in to the presentation that I gave.
So
Now,
smart.
and I'm not tooting my own horn whatsoever, but I walked out of that presentation with 3, potentially 4 good leads. And the gentleman that runs the networking event wants me to come back again and do another presentation or something very similar.
Yeah. Sweet.
Right? To me, that tells me I did something right.
Yeah.
And it all came from, again, I didn't do it in with a PowerPoint. It was a very
Yeah.
short presentation. So I didn't go into all of the thing, but like I don't have to have slides.
It
I
was a
just
full presentation. Yeah.
well, and this is something for me. I know in going live, I teach myself these ways of speaking where I don't need a net. I know what I want to say. I
Yeah.
mean, I prepared. I'm not saying that I didn't prepare, but I also didn't need anything to look at because I knew going in,
Yeah. You
this
know
is
your
what I want to
stuff.
talk about. And just refreshing my memory on that car ride out there and absorbing that information again clearly brought some of those points forward. I think that was instant. I knew I was talking to you tonight. So I wanted to share how
That's so cool.
repurposing in that aspect,
Yeah.
it's not tangible, but think of
No, you're
that
right.
content as something that could jog your memory and put some good things
Yes.
in place and allow you to use it in so many ways.
And here's the other kicker is that clearly that showed to you that that content resonated.
Yeah,
And so now you're like, okay, how can I turn up the dial on
yeah,
this content to attract clients?
absolutely. This is the power of podcasting. This is where I talk to people that say, and I'm sure you do this too, they don't want to go listen to themselves. I can't listen to my interviews. I can't listen to my guest appearances. I can't listen
Yeah.
to my own show. And I immediately say, why not? You should be listening to all of that content to discover what you're doing good,
And what you're
what you're
not.
doing not so good,
I know.
and get better at it. Whether
Yeah.
you're the host, you're the guest, whether you're playing both roles at different points, developing your skill set requires you to go back and watch some game film. And there are probably NFL quarterbacks that threw 5 interceptions on any given Sunday that don't want to go back and watch that film because they shit the bed. But in order for them to get better, they have to
Yeah.
look at where they made some mistakes. We're
Oh,
all
I
going to,
watch mine when I'm like doing clips and stuff like that. And I'll like, and I see the transcript, the captions, and I'm like,
yeah,
like
sure.
things that you say or you
Yeah.
do, or I'm like, I need to dial that in. And even
I'll,
my editor will be like, would you stop using this word or whatever it may be? You do too
I'll,
many ums and ahs or whatever. And it's
yeah,
like, okay, I need
yeah.
to dial that in. But you don't fix it unless you're
Unless you do it.
aware.
Well, I'll tell you one. I I still laugh. I shake my head. It was so cringe. When I had Simona Costantini here on the show, we were talking about, I don't remember exactly what we were talking about in the moment, but I used the phrase kitten caboodle. I don't think I've ever used that phrase in my life. And I said it and I went back. I'm like, what the hell was
What
that?
was that? That's
And
hilarious.
I left it in because it was there, but I just like, okay, never to use that again because that sounded
I
so off
know.
brand. That was terrible.
I'm
Dude.
done with that, where someone was on my show and I was a little intimidated, and so I, like, used, like, 2 words, like, over and over and over again, or I used some word and I was like, "Where'd that come from?" I was like, "Oh, sweet
Yeah.
Jesus."
Well, you
We're all
again,
human.
we are, and you don't catch all of these little subtle things unless you go back and listen.
I know.
We'll wrap up on this one, Lindsay. Honestly, I could keep this going all
I
night because
know,
there's so
totally.
much power in the conversation here, but I feel like sometimes, and it depends on the level of editing that hosts and their teams do. I am a stickler for the filler words, getting them out wherever
Mhm.
possible. The ums, the uhs, like, if it can be removed without it
Being
causing a
jarring.
clip, it's out, it's gone. I'm going to remove it. I've instructed people I've worked with, remove those words because I want it to flow and sound as natural as possible. I'm thinking listener experience first. There are some guests that have a tendency to use many filler words, phrases, flubs. It just happens, but they don't know that they're doing it. But then we go and remove it.
I know.
And so now, when the polished product goes live, if they listen to it, they're probably thinking, my God, I sound great. So it's potentially a disservice because they're
You're
hearing this
enabling.
squeaky clean product. We're enabling them to continue with
That's
these
hilarious.
terrible, and that's the thing. It's like it's not the end of the world, but when you think of the listener experience side of it,
Mhm.
do you feel that it's worth addressing, saying, hey, here's the final product, however this was something that maybe you want to be aware of in your presentation style, and B, if you do feel it's worth addressing, how do you bring that up?
I don't
Because I've never
know.
done that. I'm curious if you've ever had that type of conversation with somebody.
I totally haven't. I've had the conversation in my head,
Sure. Oh,
but
sure.
not, like, out loud.
Yeah, when you're removing like every other
I
line, every
know.
other sentence,
Or they
that's
start a sentence and don't finish it, and then kinda go on to the next and don't finish that, and then it's like,
yeah.
when is the complete sentence happening?
There's a lot to it, and that's where I feel the magic of editing, and I tell
Skill.
everybody that, from the host side and the guest side as I'm training people, don't try to be perfect. Be yourself, be
Mm,
natural. These are things that when you do hear them, you can work on them. I'm
yeah.
a perfect example of that. I used to use a lot when I was doing
Same.
podcast recordings, and I've gone back on shows that I've done in the past. I didn't even edit them out. And I don't know where it clicked in my brain that this is where I need to be creating a better user experience, but I started
Mm,
remove myself to do was don't speak like that. Don't
that
use
is
that
easier.
word. And that takes time.
It
It takes
does.
dedication. You've got to get disciplined. Now, I notice when I do my editing, and it's more so in solo episodes, but I have this drawn out and as I'm transitioning from one thought to the next sometimes.
Mm.
That's my big thing right now. What can I do to remove that? I'm trying to sound as good as I possibly can because I'm thinking about the big stage. I've set a goal for myself to do a TED Talk. I don't want to sound like a schmuck because I'll never get to that point. But
Yeah.
this is my pulpit. This is my platform.
It
This
takes
is where
training, it takes thought and effort.
and if you are conscious and aware of those
Yes.
words being in your vocabulary, you can make those strides. But sometimes, if you don't know, if no one
I
tells
know.
you, you don't know that you need to make
I
those
know.
corrections. Again, it doesn't mean that the podcast is ruined,
No.
but it's good to be aware that there's potentially some words that you use a little too frequently that you
Crooks
could make
or
some
yeah.
corrections on because you never know. You might be on a stage presenting to a big crowd. You may be presenting to your
That would
team
be
at
all
work,
bad.
right? Like there are things that you might be doing or they might be noticing it and you're not even aware of it. So the
No.
podcast can bring that out. This is a little off the subject of
It
repurposing
was a
now,
little,
but at the
but
same
needed to
time,
be said.
well, okay, then as long as I can drop the mic on that, then we're still in
Yeah,
good shape.
you can.
But overall, I think that it really comes down to focusing on what you can do to be the best possible host and be the best possible guest. Not anything to do with semantics and filler words and vernacular, but listening to what you do, how you present, how you tell stories, it's only going to make you better. Watching that game film, looking at what went well, what didn't go well, will help you prepare for the next time you take the field. It's almost football season. I'm like all jazzed up with all
I
these
know. Look at you
football
go.
analogies here, right? Well, like I said, Lyndsay, we could keep this going all night long, and we're probably going to have to, we'll do a sequel. We'll make this happen again. But in the meantime, I'd love for you to let the Bomb Squad know where they can connect with you and learn more about what you do and how you help guests repurpose their content.
Absolutely. So they can go to smoothbusinesspodcasting.com. And I do have a free guide if that's cool to share.
Sure thing.
All right. So it's leverageyourpodcast.com/guest. And so it's 3 strategies to repurpose and leverage your podcast guesting interviews for more authority boosting content that brings you clients and opportunities. So yeah, I just want people to leverage and repurpose the heck out of their podcast guest spots so it can help them grow their business and build more relationships.
Well, I'll make sure those links are in the show notes. That way
Sweet.
it's easy on the Bomb Squad to connect and get access to that. Lyndsay, thank you so much for
Thank you for
bringing
having
your
me.
insights to Let's
I
Blow
always
This Up.
love
You're
talking to
welcome.
you.
Likewise, you're welcome here anytime. And as I said, we'll do this again in the live stream environment, and maybe I'll even make a second appearance on your show. We'll see how things unfold. So to the Bomb Squad, thank you for being here. This new time slot of 7 p.m. It's going to take me a minute to get used to as I look out the window of my studio. It's still light out. It's kind of weird. I'm so accustomed to it being dark at this point when we wrap up, but this is kind of cool. But 7 p.m. every Wednesday on Facebook, on LinkedIn, and on YouTube on the Bombtrack Media channels. We go live to record Let's Blow This Up. Next week, Wednesday, August 21st, we are going to have an absolute blast on this show because I am joined by the one and only Paula Sema, host of the Talk Shit with P podcast.
Nice.
I met Paula in Charlotte, and wow, she liked to put it back on me. She gave me some shit, and I'm sure that's going to be a lot of our conversation. It's going to be a lot of fun, and I encourage everybody out there listening on the podcast version or watching the live stream, be here Wednesday at 7:00 p.m. because Paul and I are going to have a damn good time. Until that takes place, on behalf of Lyndsay Phillips, I'd like to thank everybody in the Bomb Squad for joining us here tonight. And until our paths cross again on Let's Blow This Up next week, this is your host, Jason Sircone, reminding you to stay explosive. We'll see you next time.